we do, we hope, contributes to the monarchy and the way in which it can convey continuity.
In a silent courtroom, Prince Harry broke down in tears just moments after turning over private messages that could destroy Meghan Markle. What you're about to hear has stunned the entire royal family, shaken Buckingham Palace to its core, and changed the course of the monarchy's future. In a shocking turn of events, Prince Harry has reportedly handed over secret messages, texts, and emails that directly implicate Meghan in a growing scandal. And it didn't stop there. With King Charles and Princess Anne watching, Harry made a tearful confession that brought the courtroom to a halt. Why did he do it? What do the messages reveal? And why are royal insiders calling this betrayal the beginning of the end? Stay with us. What we've uncovered will leave you speechless. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. 2 minutes. That was all it took to turn Buckingham Palace from a stoic symbol of centuries-old tradition into the epicenter of one of the most emotionally charged and potentially explosive royal dramas in living memory. In those 2 minutes, courtroom silence gave way to gasps. In those 2 minutes, Prince Harry, the once wayward Duke of Sussex, rose to his feet and, with trembling hands and a cracking voice, handed over evidence that would send shockwaves through the monarchy and across the globe. And in those same 2 minutes, for the first time in public memory, Princess Anne's steely composure cracked. King Charles, aged beyond his years by illness and scandal, closed his eyes and exhaled deeply as though bracing for a tidal wave of truth. This wasn't just another royal dispute. This was something else entirely. Let's rewind. It all began with whispers, rumors brushed off as tabloid fodder or dismissed as conspiracy nonsense. But in the shadows of those rumors grew an unease that would finally break into the light. Behind palace doors, behind the smiles and forced courtesies, was a narrative unspoken, a growing chasm within the royal family that had long been buried under protocol and performative unity. For months, the press had speculated about growing tensions between Meghan Markle and the royal institution. There were allegations, denials, legal threats, and carefully worded statements. But none of that prepared anyone for what was to come. The silence was deafening. For years, the royal family's motto had been clear: never complain, never explain. But that unofficial code was about to be shattered. The trigger? A set of private messages, encrypted and thought to be buried forever, allegedly written by Meghan Markle herself. And the person who would finally expose them was the last man anyone expected: her husband. The betrayal was not just marital. It was national. It was constitutional. It was human. What drove Prince Harry to turn over these private messages? What did they contain? And why was he seen breaking down in tears in front of judges, journalists, and his family? This is not just a story about royalty. This is a story about the collision of love, loyalty, power, and truth. And when those forces crash into one another, no crown is sturdy enough to weather the storm. At the heart of this seismic event is a very personal decision, one that came not from pressure, not from politics, but from what insiders say was Harry's deep internal reckoning. Sources close to the prince, speaking on condition of anonymity, described sleepless nights, heated phone calls to old confidants, and a period of soul-searching that led to a dramatic, unthinkable conclusion. He would no longer lie to protect the very narrative that had isolated him from his brother, his father, and the institution into which he was born. So, what were these messages? And how could they be so damaging that even Princess Anne, known for her unwavering discipline and military-grade emotional restraint, was visibly shaken when they were read aloud? Before those answers came to light, there were signs. Small, seemingly unrelated moments that, when placed in retrospect, now seem like puzzle pieces snapping into place. For instance, Princess Anne's sudden visit to Clarence House 3 weeks prior, an unannounced meeting that insiders said left both her and the king visibly agitated. Then there was King Charles's abrupt change in tone during a speech about family unity. He had spoken of forgiveness, redemption, and the importance of truth, even when truth is painful. At the time, the remarks seemed benign. Now they feel almost prophetic. And then there was Harry himself. Weeks before the courtroom appearance, he had been spotted leaving a solicitor's office in central London. His expression was unreadable, but the very fact that he was back on British soil, unannounced, and without Meghan, was enough to stir speculation. The palace issued no comment. The Sussex camp remained silent. Yet all the signs were there. Something monumental was building behind closed doors. It was only a matter of time before the dam burst. The moment finally came during a private but high-stakes legal proceeding involving allegations that have been described by one court official as potentially destabilizing to the monarchy. The nature of the case had been kept deliberately vague in the press, an ongoing effort, reportedly spearheaded by senior palace aides, to prevent escalation. But nothing could suppress what happened next. In a packed courtroom under heavy security and intense press surveillance, Prince Harry was called to testify. No cameras were allowed inside. But within minutes of his appearance, journalists positioned just beyond the courtroom steps began texting updates furiously. Something was happening. Something big. Then came the leak, not of the documents themselves, but of the moment Harry handed them over. One senior court reporter, who had been covering royal affairs for over 3 decades, wrote on X, formerly Twitter, "In all my years of reporting, I've never seen anything like it." The room went still. Prince Harry is in tears. Judge appears taken aback. What's happening? Insiders would later confirm that the messages in question were not merely private, they were incriminating. While the exact contents have not been made public, sources describe them as revealing manipulation, coercion, and a pattern of narrative control allegedly orchestrated by Meghan. One insider claimed the messages paint a picture of someone deliberately isolating Harry from his family in order to wield him as a weapon against the crown. Shocking as that may be, what stunned observers most wasn't the content, it was Harry's decision to hand it over. For years, he had stood by Meghan through public scrutiny, media assaults, and family fallout. Together, they had given interviews condemning racism, abuse, and neglect within the royal family. Together, they had sued tabloids. Together, they had fled the UK and carved out a new life in California. Yet now, he stood alone. What changed? Friends of Harry say the turning point came after a series of private meetings with Princess and meetings that were initially dismissed as family reconciliations but may have actually been interventions. And, known for her brutal honesty and deep sense of duty, reportedly told Harry, "The truth will come out eventually. It's better if it comes from you." Whether that moment planted the seed or simply confirmed what Harry already knew, what followed was a dramatic departure from the narrative he and Meghan had so carefully constructed. In that courtroom, Harry wasn't just a prince. He wasn't just a husband. He was a man unraveling, confronting not just the decisions of the woman he loved, but the role he had played in enabling them. And that realization, say those who were there, hit him harder than any headline or accusation ever could. As he sat down after handing over the evidence, silence filled the courtroom. Even the judge, a veteran of high-profile cases, reportedly paused for several seconds before continuing. According to multiple observers, tears streamed down Harry's face, silent, uncontainable. At that moment, the palace's carefully controlled narrative fractured. This wasn't just about reputational damage or legal strategy. This was about something deeper, a family reckoning, a moral turning point. And as King Charles looked on, frail but alert, it was clear that a line had been crossed. Not one of scandal, those come and go, but of integrity, of truth. Princess, and her hands clasped tightly in her lap, reportedly whispered something to the king, a phrase lip readers would later interpret as, "This changes everything." And it did. This is not just a story about a prince crying in court. This is about the moment the royal family stopped pretending. The moment the mask slipped. The moment private pain bled into public view. In the chapters ahead, we will unpack everything. The origins of the messages, what they reveal, who knew what and when. We'll explore how Princess and took on the role of peacemaker, why King Charles gave his quiet blessing for Harry to come clean, and what this all means for the future of the monarchy and the Sussexes. But for now, know this. The 2 minutes that shook the royal family have passed. The silence has been broken, and nothing will ever be the same again. The truth, when it finally comes, rarely arrives quietly. In the case of Prince Harry and the leak of Meghan Markle's private messages, it arrived like a wrecking ball, tearing through carefully constructed lies, royal press protocols, and even the most sacred of family boundaries. This section pulls back the curtain on the hours and days leading up to that bombshell courtroom moment. How Princess, and long dismissed as a ceremonial figure, became the silent architect of the confrontation that would redefine Prince Harry's role in the royal saga and force a reckoning from the very institution he once abandoned. It began with a visit no one saw coming. 2 months before Harry's now infamous appearance in court, Princess, and made a quiet, but deliberate trip to Los Angeles. There was no fanfare, no press release. Buckingham Palace didn't list it among her public engagements. Her team claimed she was simply on a private holiday, but insider sources say otherwise. And didn't go to California for sun and leisure. She went for Harry. It wasn't the first time Anne had intervened in family affairs, but this was different. According to one senior royal aide, she wasn't going as a sister this time. She was going as a soldier, and had seen the intel. She knew what was in those messages. That same aide confirmed that Anne's access to private security briefings had revealed communications previously intercepted and evaluated by advisors close to the crown. They had not been acted upon for fear of diplomatic fallout, but Anne knew they couldn't be buried forever. Her meeting with Harry lasted just under 6 hours. It was held at a private residence in Montecito, not far from the Sussexes' home, and attended by only 3 people, Princess and Prince Harry, and a retired Royal Navy security attaché who had served under and for decades. Meghan was not present. Multiple sources say and came prepared with copies of the encrypted messages, ones Harry had likely seen before but had never fully confronted. These messages weren't screenshots. They were extracted records, backed by forensic metadata. What made them damning wasn't only what was said, but the cold calculation behind their timing. A recurring pattern emerged. Sources say messages sent strategically ahead of Harry's most controversial public comments, indicating that Meghan had been scripting and orchestrating the narratives released to the media, sometimes down to specific vocabulary. These included phrases Harry would later use in televised interviews and podcast appearances, sometimes nearly word for word. Harry, according to insiders who spoke with former palace staffers, was initially defensive, even hostile. He reportedly told Anne she was being used by the palace and that any message taken out of context could be manipulated. But Anne didn't back down. She told him plainly, "You've allowed yourself to be guided by someone with no regard for your blood, your duty, or your own peace of mind." It was a line that hit hard. That night, Harry didn't return home. Instead, he checked into a private villa under an alias, a detail confirmed by hotel staff later questioned by the press. What happened over the next 3 days is not entirely known, but those close to him claim he fell into a kind of solitary reflection. He stopped communicating. He misscheduled calls with media representatives and did not respond to messages from Meghan's team. It was during this period of isolation that Prince Harry reached out to his brother, Prince William, for the first time in over 8 months. Sources inside Kensington Palace have confirmed that a single call, lasting just 11 minutes, marked a turning point in their fractured relationship. William did not say much. But when Harry told him, "I have something you need to see," the heir to the throne reportedly replied, "Then show it to the court, not to me." The line was more than a rejection. It was a directive. Back in the UK, whispers began to circulate within the corridors of Whitehall and among high-level royal advisors. Something was moving. Princess Anne had returned from California with a new kind of urgency. She was seen making several unannounced visits to Clarence House in Sandringham. At one point, insiders say she and King Charles engaged in a heated closed-door meeting that lasted nearly 2 hours. No aides were allowed inside. When Anne emerged, her face was pale, her jaws set. Charles, witnesses say, remained seated for several minutes afterward, visibly shaken. And often seen as the no-nonsense royal, was now at the center of a high-stakes family gambit. She knew what was in the messages. More importantly, she knew Harry was beginning to doubt the version of reality he had lived in for the past 5 years. In the days that followed, logistical gears began turning behind the scenes. A special legal team was assembled to assess the admissibility of the encrypted messages. The judge presiding over the confidential legal matter granted a private review session with Harry and his legal counsel. That session, lasting over 6 hours, reportedly left Harry speechless for most of its duration. At one point, a junior lawyer assigned to the case described Harry as a man staring into a mirror and seeing someone else's face. It was in that room, sources say, that the prince made up his mind, not just about the case, but about his life. Still, he hesitated. Returning to public life in the UK, especially to face a legal proceeding with his own wife's name in the balance, was unthinkable. But that's when the final piece fell into place. King Charles summoned him. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request. It was a handwritten letter delivered to Harry's legal team, bearing the royal seal. In it, Charles reportedly wrote, If there's still a part of you that believes in truth, don't let silence be your inheritance. The wording was deliberate, poetic, and devastating. Harry didn't respond directly, but 2 days later, he boarded a flight to London under an alias, accompanied by 2 private security agents and no press detail. The court date was set. The palace held its breath. And then the day arrived. Early morning. Heavy skies. A near-total media blackout had been imposed around the proceedings, yet rumors had swirled for days. Journalists camped outside the courthouse. Satellite trucks lined nearby alleys. Police officers patrolled rooftops. The sense was unmistakable. Something historic was about to unfold. Harry arrived through a discreet underground entrance, but his presence was quickly confirmed by a source within the building. At 10:02 a.m., he entered the courtroom, flanked by legal counsel. Across the gallery, several senior royal advisors were seated. Princess Anne, in full military regalia, was among them. An unusual choice, suggesting she was not merely attending as family, but as a royal representative. And then the moment came. A slim leather-bound folder was placed on the desk before the judge. Harry's hand shook as he pushed it forward. The judge, known for his procedural rigor, asked the courtroom to observe silence while the contents were reviewed. For 10 minutes, no one spoke. Lawyers flipped pages. The judge's expression shifted, then hardened. Occasionally, he would glance up at Harry, who kept his head down. When the review concluded, the judge made only one comment. What's been presented here, if verified, could warrant further inquiry beyond this court's scope. The implication was nuclear. What lay in that folder wasn't just personal. It was institutional, potentially criminal. The courtroom was dismissed for recess. Outside, the press erupted. What followed was a flurry of behind-the-scenes consultations. The royal household issued a rare private directive. No member of the family was to comment or post on social media. A communications freeze was imposed across official channels. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle, still in California, reportedly contacted her attorneys with emergency instructions. Inside the courtroom, Harry remained seated even after recess was called. His legal team attempted to usher him out, but he refused. One aide reported hearing him whisper, "Let them read all of it." Every last word. As journalists scrambled to piece together what had just occurred, palace aides issued a terse statement. "We are aware of developments in an ongoing legal matter and will respond appropriately at the conclusion of proceedings." Behind closed doors, chaos reigned. Princess Anne met with King Charles the same evening, this time at Windsor. No aides, no advisors, only father and daughter. Their conversation, reportedly overheard by a palace butler in the hallway, consisted of just 7 words from, "And he did what had to be done." Charles nodded. And so the monarchy stood at the brink, not of collapse, but of transformation. The courtroom was ice cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the sheer weight of what hung in the silence. The legal team had returned. The judge, robed in black and hunched over the bench, wore an expression caught somewhere between astonishment and fury. It was the moment everything had been leading toward, the unsealing of the encrypted messages between Meghan Markle and an anonymous communication strategist. Messages that, until that very hour, had only existed in whispers, on burner phones, and behind closed palace doors. What happened next was not theatrical. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and far more dangerous for it. The lead barrister acting on behalf of Prince Harry stood. She adjusted her glasses and addressed the judge without pomp. "Your Honor, with permission from our client and in accordance with his personal request, we submit these messages to the court as unredacted evidence of influence, coercion, and strategic manipulation of both press and public narrative, originating from one party and implicating the institution of the monarchy." There was a pause. A murmur spread through the room. Then the barrister continued, revealing the first message aloud. "Begin leak plan before Oprah interview. Coordinate with media outlets D and B. Harry will resist at first. Send reinforcement through Sam with keywords, your truth, betrayal, and unfinished business. Make sure Netflix and Archwell draft quotes in advance." The Washington Post published a long-form analysis titled, "From Victim to Architect, Rethinking Meghan Markle's Royal Narrative." The piece methodically dissected the contradiction between Meghan's public statements and her private messages. CNN brought in behavioral psychologists who examined the tone of the texts, calling them emotionally manipulative and indicative of a high-functioning strategist. Even in Hollywood, where celebrity politics and loyalty often intersect, the reaction was far from supportive. High-level producers who had previously expressed interest in working with the Sussexes began to pull back. Netflix, which had once celebrated the couple with a multi-million-dollar content deal, paused development on their upcoming animated series and halted the press campaign for the follow-up documentary. One entertainment executive, speaking under condition of anonymity, told Variety, "It's not about the scandal. It's about the brand confusion. We back them as victims turned storytellers. But now there's a perception of manipulation, and that's a commercial liability." Meanwhile, Spotify, already under pressure from its poorly performing Sussex-hosted podcast, removed promotional banners of their content from the platform. Social media sentiment was turning faster than executives could react. Hashtags like #MeghanExposed, #SussexScam, and #RoyalSabotage began trending across X, TikTok, and Instagram. Memes flooded in. Public sentiment, particularly among older Americans and conservative voices, was merciless. But not all critiques came from the right. On The View, co-host Sunny Hostin, a longtime Meghan supporter, surprised viewers when she admitted these messages raise serious questions. If she was orchestrating a media strategy while presenting herself as entirely a victim, that's something we deserve answers about. I still believe she experienced racism and mental health trauma, but both things can be true. This part can't be ignored. In the United Kingdom, the shift was even more profound. For years, British media had been vilified for its coverage of Meghan Markle. Many commentators, particularly outside the UK, accused tabloids of racism, classism, and xenophobia. But now, in the wake of the messages, many of those same critics were revisiting their judgments. The tone of the conversation changed almost overnight. The Times published an op-ed entitled "The Queen's Instincts Were Right," reflecting on how Queen Elizabeth II had reportedly advised caution when Meghan first joined the family. According to Palace insiders, the Queen had been cordial but privately skeptical about Meghan's long-term fit within the royal household. That skepticism, once portrayed as unfounded elitism, was now being reframed as royal foresight. Even the BBC, which had long taken a more reserved and neutral tone, aired a special segment titled "The Fall of the House of Sussex," chronicling the timeline of events that led from Meghan's wedding to the courtroom revelations. The narrative was no longer colored by sympathy, it was grounded in disappointment. Meanwhile, public trust in Prince Harry plummeted. Polling conducted by YouGov UK showed a significant drop in his approval rating. Once a beloved spare to the heir, Harry was now being seen as complicit. The question became whether he was a passive participant or an active architect. But the more disturbing possibility lingered in the subtext of every article, every panel debate. Had Harry been a pawn? A leaked internal memo from the Prime Minister's office, not intended for public release, surfaced through an investigative report. In it, a senior government advisor commented, "We are entering uncharted territory. If the royal family is perceived as fractured from within and vulnerable to manipulation, it weakens our soft power abroad." It was a striking acknowledgement, not of the scandal's emotional impact, but its geopolitical implications. In Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, three of the largest Commonwealth nations, parliamentary debates were sparked over whether the monarchy remained relevant. Pro-monarchy MPs found themselves on the defensive as Republicans argued, with renewed vigor, that the royal institution was unsustainable. The Sussex scandal became a symbolic rallying point for those seeking full independence from the crown. But perhaps nowhere outside the UK did the fallout hit harder than in Africa. Meghan and Harry had long spoken of their emotional connection to the continent, even titling one of their early philanthropic efforts after the Swahili word Archie, meaning source of action. But for many African activists and historians, the juxtaposition of their royal privilege and these latest revelations rang hollow. Kenyan writer and social critic Akinyi Odhiambo published a viral piece in The Guardian Nigeria titled, "When Victims Wear Crowns, The Sussex Myth and Africa's Silence." In it, she wrote, "We were asked to empathize with a duchess whose greatest burden was media scrutiny, even as our own journalists disappeared in the night. We were asked to revere a prince who left a palace and called it exile. But now the veil is lifting. Perhaps what they fled was accountability, not oppression." In South Africa, where Meghan had controversially compared royal life to being imprisoned, like Nelson Mandela, the reaction was especially brutal. Prominent human rights activists condemned the Sussexes' appropriation of struggle narratives, particularly in light of the leaked texts suggesting manipulation behind the scenes. The backlash was not limited to commentary. Meghan's philanthropic foundation, Archewell, experienced a significant drop in international donations. Corporate sponsors paused their involvement. The global image that had once been synonymous with modern activism and royal reformation was now a case study in brand disintegration. And through it all, one question remained unanswered. How much had Harry known? And when? Journalists began digging deeper, not just into Meghan's messages, but into emails, scheduling documents, and staffing changes that corresponded with critical dates in their royal departure. One particularly damning timeline showed a sudden staff reshuffling at Frogmore Cottage just days after Meghan's messages discussed resetting the PR lens before final exit. Staff who had worked for the couple for years were suddenly let go without explanation. One former aide, speaking to the Sunday Telegraph under condition of anonymity, revealed there were moments when Harry seemed visibly uneasy with the messaging. But whenever he raised concerns, Meghan shut them down. She had the final word, and he always deferred. In California, the walls of Montecito remained quiet, but the tremors from beyond them were impossible to ignore. Paparazzi were camped outside in numbers not seen since the early days of their departure from the UK. Drones hovered. Reporters stalked the property line. And yet, there was no official response. No interview. No Instagram post. No carefully edited documentary scene. Just silence. The Sussex team, once known for their speed and strategic brilliance, had frozen. Those who had once championed them now watched from a distance. Even some of their fiercest defenders, media personalities, political allies, celebrity friends, had turned cautious. No one wanted to be next to the blast radius if another revelation emerged. In the private corridors of power, the royals waited. William remained publicly silent but was deeply engaged with his team. He knew that the Sussex brand unraveling internationally was both a vindication and a danger. It validated the palace's earlier concerns, but it also inflamed anti-monarchy sentiment around the world. The key was to show dignity without arrogance, control the narrative without provoking a new one. And so, as the days passed, a strange paradox emerged. For the first time in years, the Sussexes were no longer speaking, but the world couldn't stop talking about them. Within the walls of Buckingham Palace, a storm of silence settled like an oppressive fog. The grandeur of the royal institution had always rested on its ability to withstand scandal, to rise above the noise and let the winds of controversy pass. But this time was different. This time, the noise was deafening, and it wasn't just press speculation. It was sworn testimony, court-submitted evidence, and a trail of digital messages that painted a picture of betrayal that reached all the way to the palace gates. King Charles III, now into the second year of his reign, found himself confronted with a crisis that neither his decades of royal grooming nor his inherited authority could prepare him for. Despite his known tendency to micromanage and write endless handwritten memos, he had taken a softer approach when it came to Prince Harry. The younger son had always been emotional, unpredictable, but Charles had hoped that fatherly restraint would eventually guide Harry back into the fold. That hope was now hanging by a thread. Inside a private study lined with old leather-bound tomes and portraits of long-dead monarchs, Charles sat with Queen Camilla as aides brought him the latest developments in binders, notepads, and iPads stacked with headlines. Pages detailed every message leaked, the courtroom transcript, and the brutal response from international press. The king, who had just returned from a state visit to Norway, barely spoke. For long stretches, he only read, occasionally tapping a pen against his lip before scribbling marginal notes no one else could decipher. Camilla broke the silence. "You knew, Charles. You said it years ago. That girl would tear the roof off if we let her." Charles didn't respond right away. He looked out toward the rain-laced window before saying, "I thought time would soften her. I believed Harry needed her more than we needed him." It was one of the rare instances of regret he voiced aloud. The truth was, Charles had made conscious decisions not to intervene in the Sussexes' retreat from royal life. He had allowed them their space in California, had granted them financial leniency during the transition, and had avoided public confrontation, even when privately he was fuming. Charles believed that by not cutting them off completely, he was preserving the possibility of their return. But now, it seemed, they had never intended to return at all. The messaging from Meghan revealed deliberate strategies for exit, brand control, and global leverage. It was more than disappointing, it was strategic warfare. But while Charles wore the weight of fatherhood and monarchy on his shoulders like an old ceremonial robe, it was Prince William who bore the full brunt of betrayal. Unlike Charles, William had been vocal behind the scenes. He had warned the palace years earlier that Harry's marriage to Meghan could result in unpredictable consequences, not because of who Meghan was, but because of how quickly things had escalated. William had tried to bridge the gap in the beginning, inviting Meghan to Sandringham with open arms, participating in public appearances, even letting his children call her Aunt Meg. But as rifts widened and media manipulation took hold, William found himself isolated. Meghan's portrayal of Kate in the Oprah interview, and later in the Netflix series, had deeply hurt both him and his wife. When the courtroom messages broke, William's fury was not quiet. In a private meeting with his most trusted aides, he slammed his hand against the polished oak table in Kensington Palace and shouted, "She weaponized everything, even our kindness." And he let her. A royal press officer attempted to interject, suggesting a strategic release to reaffirm the family's unity. But William cut him off. "No statements," he said firmly. "Let the public see who they really are. No rebuttals. Let their silence speak louder than any PR campaign." William understood the modern media cycle. He knew that timing was more important than truth in shaping public perception. If the palace tried to defend itself now, it would look reactionary. But if it held its ground, if it let the Sussexes stew in their own fallout, public opinion would solidify, without the royal family having to say a word. And yet, even as he played the long game, William couldn't suppress the personal betrayal. In his private notes, he wrote, "It wasn't the lies that hurt the most. It was knowing he knew they were lies and said nothing." Kate, the Princess of Wales, was equally devastated. For years, she had tried to maintain civility, even offering Meghan private support during her early days in the royal family. But the messages revealed in court, cold, dismissive, and calculating, depicted Meghan not as a struggling outsider, but as someone plotting dominance. In one particularly stinging exchange, Meghan reportedly wrote to a friend, "Kate's only power is silence. I'll break that too eventually." Kate wept when she read it, according to a senior household staffer. She had never responded to the attacks in interviews, in books, or in social media commentary. She had always chosen the high road. But now, silence felt like a burden, not a virtue. And yet, she kept it. For the sake of her children. For the sake of the institution. For the sake of William, who now needed her strength more than ever. In the corridors of Windsor Castle, other royals were weighing in as well. Princess and Charles's sister, and known for her bluntness, reportedly told aides, "Enough is enough. They should be disowned. Strip the titles. Strip the privileges. Let them see how far self-righteousness gets them without a crown to dangle in front of cameras." And had never warmed to Meghan, not out of pettiness, but out of suspicion. She viewed royal duty as sacred. She had watched generations of scandal rock the family, and she had weathered them all through sheer stoicism. To her, Meghan's entry into royal life had always carried the sin of opportunism. And now, the evidence was stacking in her favor. Even Prince Edward and his wife Sophie, normally low-profile figures who avoided the glare of drama, were said to be quietly seething. One insider said Sophie commented privately, "We welcomed them, we defended them, and now we've all been made fools of." The mood among the working royals was one of quiet consolidation. Meetings were held. Calendars were rearranged. Public appearances were calibrated with military precision. There was an unspoken consensus. This was not the moment to fracture. This was the moment to fortify. Meanwhile, palace legal advisors were brought in to assess the implications of Meghan's messages. There was no official investigation yet, but the question of revoking the Sussex titles was now seriously on the table. For years, the monarchy had avoided this nuclear option, fearing it would appear vengeful. But public opinion was shifting so dramatically that what once seemed like an overreach now looked like prudence. In internal discussions, 3 potential responses were debated. The first, a public statement expressing sadness and disappointment, reaffirming the family's commitment to unity and truth. This was Charles's preferred path, dignified, restrained, emotionally intelligent. The second, complete silence. No comment. Let the media and public do the talking. This was William's preference. Strategic, patient, potentially devastating in its own right. The third, a formal announcement stripping Harry and Meghan of their Duke and Duchess titles, citing conduct unbecoming of royal representatives. This was Anne's suggestion, and she had growing support among older members of the Royal Advisory Board. But none of these options could be enacted without risk. Stripping the titles would invite legal challenges. It could also galvanize the Sussexes' dwindling base of supporters and push them into retaliatory storytelling. perhaps with more interviews, more leaked messages, and even another tell-all book. Remaining silent, on the other hand, risked appearing passive. The public might interpret it as cowardice or worse, guilt, and a gentle statement might be too little too late. And so, for the moment, they waited. But waiting did not mean inaction. Inside the palace, a quiet war room had been assembled. Social media analysts tracked sentiment in real time. Crisis communications teams drafted multiple responses for various hypothetical outcomes. Private investigators were retained, not to expose Meghan and Harry, but to prepare defenses against possible retaliatory claims. A confidential report prepared for the king included background on Meghan's prior associations, her communications with journalists, and a timeline of her most politically charged statements. The report was not intended for release, it was for protection. The monarchy was preparing not just for media warfare, but for legal and reputational battles that could last for years. Yet despite all the analysis, strategy, and diplomacy, the emotional toll was evident. For Charles, the weight was personal. He had already lost a brother to scandal. Now he was watching his younger son implode. For William, it was a loss of trust that might never be restored. For Kate, it was a wound masked behind composure. And for the monarchy itself, it was an existential threat, less about survival and more about legacy. They all knew the truth. The damage had already been done. The question now was whether anything could be salvaged. Back in the United Kingdom, the atmosphere within the walls of the royal residences had turned from wary concern to a determined resolve. The evidence emerging from American courtrooms and media outlets had laid bare a story that many inside the palace had long suspected but never been able to publicly substantiate. For years, accusations had circled, and internal whispers hinted that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's departure had not been as straightforward as their Oprah Winfrey interview had portrayed. But now, with damning messages, damning testimonies, and an avalanche of shifting global opinion, the monarchy found itself vindicated. Within Buckingham Palace, the Queen's former aides, now working closely under King Charles III, operated in an environment of controlled crisis management. The late Queen Elizabeth II had spent much of her reign mastering the art of dignified silence, a policy that the institution attempted to maintain even under the most excruciating public pressures. But now, in the face of overwhelming evidence, King Charles and Prince William made the strategic decision to begin adjusting the public narrative, not by speaking directly, but by allowing previously suppressed facts to surface. A senior palace aide, speaking on background, described the change in tone. There was no gloating, no satisfaction, only sorrow, but also determination. The royal family had endured a tremendous reputational assault. Now, the world could finally see that there was far more going on behind the scenes than the Sussexes ever let on. Prince William, long at the epicenter of this familial and institutional storm, was particularly affected. Unlike Harry, whose role had always been more flexible and forgiving, William had spent his entire life preparing to ascend to the throne. For him, duty came first. And when his brother and sister-in-law began public campaigns that painted the family as cruel, racially insensitive, and emotionally negligent, it wasn't just a breach of trust, it was a declaration of war. Over the past year, William had largely maintained his silence. Even as social media brimmed with accusations, even as international coverage of Meghan and Harry's interviews and projects cast him in an unflattering light, he held fast to the royal code. But behind the scenes, those close to him knew the damage was deeply personal. Harry's book, Spare, which accused William of violent confrontations and dismissive cruelty, had hurt him more than he let on. Now, in light of Meghan's messages and the courtroom revelations suggesting years of narrative orchestration and misrepresentation, William began reclaiming his voice, albeit indirectly. High-ranking palace figures began reaching out to media allies, not in the aggressive, leak-filled manner often attributed to other royal households, but through careful corrections, anonymous briefings, and sanctioned interviews that subtly shifted the public's perception. Former palace employees, long silenced by fear of legal retaliation or public condemnation, began to speak more freely. Some appeared in documentaries. Others gave extensive quotes to reputable newspapers. The floodgates had opened. One former communications secretary who had resigned during the height of the Sussexes' tensions now revealed details about internal discussions. How staffers had warned senior royals about the potential for Meghan and Harry to use their royal titles for personal gain. how certain demands made by the couple bordered on unrealistic, and how repeated efforts at reconciliation were rebuffed behind the scenes. The goal had always been to give them space and support, said the former aide. But what we now understand is that they had a script, and we were merely playing supporting roles. The minute we stopped fitting their narrative, we became the villains. Queen Camilla, often painted as a controversial figure in royal history herself, reportedly took a measured approach during the chaos. While privately horrified by the personal attacks leveled at the family, particularly by the Oprah interview and the Netflix series, she publicly maintained her typical stoic demeanor. However, close friends say she offered unwavering support to Kate, Princess of Wales, who had borne much of Meghan's criticisms, especially the now-revealed falsehood surrounding the flower girl dress incident during the royal wedding. According to newly released communications, it was not Kate who had made Meghan cry, as previously claimed in that infamous interview, but rather the reverse. The revelation hit the public like a bombshell. Suddenly, months of social media abuse, online articles, and hate-filled commentary against Kate were called into question. Sympathy flooded back to the Princess of Wales, with commentators and columnists alike acknowledging the grace she had shown in the face of apparent deception. Kate herself continued to say nothing publicly, but insiders noted her renewed energy in royal engagements. Her calm, composed appearance at state events and charitable functions was now seen not just as duty, but as quiet defiance. She had endured a campaign of public character assassination and had come through it with her dignity intact. For King Charles, the revelations carried a dual weight, one of personal betrayal and institutional concern. He had worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy, hoping to carry forward the legacy of his mother while ushering in a more accessible, empathetic royal family. Meghan and Harry's criticisms had, at one point, severely damaged that effort, particularly among younger generations in Britain and in Commonwealth countries. The allegations of racism, the accusations of indifference to mental health struggles, and the claim that the institution was outdated had all resonated widely. Now, with those allegations under renewed scrutiny, Charles saw an opportunity, not for retaliation, but for restoration. Palace sources reported that he convened a series of private meetings with key advisors to assess the impact and plan a carefully calibrated response. There would be no direct confrontation with the Sussexes, but the royal household would subtly reinforce the truth through public initiatives, increased visibility, and collaborations with trusted media channels. For instance, the palace began quietly supporting the publication of a new biography of Prince William, written by a respected royal historian with access to previously unseen materials. The book aimed to paint a fuller picture of William's role during the Sussexes' departure, including the private efforts he had made to bridge the divide and the extent of the strain it placed on his young family. Meanwhile, conversations within Parliament and among constitutional scholars reignited over whether Meghan and Harry should retain their royal titles. Until recently, the idea of revoking the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles had been dismissed as too aggressive or unseemly. But now, amid growing public resentment, the conversation returned with vigor. Some MPs openly called for formal legislation to strip the titles. Others suggested a soft removal, where the couple would be asked to voluntarily relinquish them. The public response to these ideas was overwhelmingly supportive. Polls showed that a majority of Britons believed the Sussexes no longer represented the values of the monarchy and should not benefit from its prestige. Editorials across the political spectrum echoed this sentiment, arguing that the titles had become more of a brand than a birthright. Amid all this, Princess Anne remained a force of unshakable composure and strength. Always known for her no-nonsense attitude and deep commitment to service, she took on even more public duties in the wake of the scandal. According to several reports, she had been instrumental in encouraging the royal family to maintain a unified front, despite the emotional weight of the situation. "She's the backbone," said one palace staffer. When others were shaken, she was firm. She reminded everyone that the institution is bigger than any one scandal. One of the more surprising developments came from Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, who had typically remained in the background of royal drama. In recent months, they began stepping into more prominent roles, attending more high-profile events and subtly taking over responsibilities that once might have been shared with Harry and Meghan. Their poised, drama-free image was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in Montecito, and the public took notice. The British media, for its part, found itself vindicated. For years, journalists and tabloids had been accused of racism, unfair scrutiny, and sensationalism in their coverage of Meghan and Harry. While some of that criticism was warranted, the recent revelations provided a counter-narrative. Several journalists published reflective pieces acknowledging past missteps but defending their skepticism about the Sussexes' narrative. One prominent royal correspondent wrote, "We were labeled as villains for asking questions. But now, those questions have answers, and they're not coming from the tabloids. They're coming from courtrooms and insiders." Internationally, Commonwealth nations that had once expressed disappointment in the monarchy due to Meghan's allegations began to recalibrate their views. In countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, public opinion polls showed increased favorability toward the royal family. Commentators noted that while systemic issues still needed addressing, the Sussexes had exploited legitimate concerns for personal gain. In the end, the British royal family emerged from the firestorm not unscathed, but stronger. The scandal had exposed wounds, but it also clarified loyalties. It forced the institution to reckon with modern challenges and reaffirm its core values: duty, resilience, and service. The contrast between the quiet resolve of William and Kate and the chaotic self-promotion of Harry and Meghan was now as stark as ever. The monarchy had not merely survived the Sussex crisis, it had endured it with its integrity intact. Across the Atlantic, in the heart of American media and celebrity culture, the fallout from the explosive revelations surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry reverberated with seismic force. For years, the couple had cultivated an image of being victims of a rigid, outdated monarchy. Their narrative of escape and emancipation from royal life had captivated the American public, particularly among younger generations who saw them as modern-day rebels breaking free from an oppressive institution. But now, as voice messages, testimonies, and correspondence exposed a calculated manipulation of truth, and as witness after witness came forward painting a very different picture of events, the American media began turning inward. Talk shows that once lavished praise upon the couple suddenly found themselves on the defensive. Network anchors who had enthusiastically endorsed the Sussexes' version of events were forced to reevaluate their stance in light of the growing body of evidence that suggested deep misrepresentation, if not outright dishonesty. Major outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times began revisiting previous coverage. Editorial boards convened emergency meetings. Public relations experts were invited onto primetime panels to assess how the couple's brand could recover from what many were now calling the greatest self-inflicted reputational implosion in recent royal history. The shift was not subtle. NBC's morning program, once a soft haven for Harry and Meghan supporters, ran a segment titled "From Grace to Disgrace" that examined the impact of the leaked evidence on their standing. The show's host, visibly uncomfortable, asked, "Were we too quick to champion their cause without verifying the full story?" Hollywood, too, was rattled. At one point, Meghan and Harry were in talks for a series of new media projects, buoyed by their multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix, Spotify, and other major platforms. But within days of the scandal's full exposure, those conversations went quiet. Studios that once saw the couple as a ticket to a new generation of viewers now regarded them as radioactive. A major streaming executive, speaking anonymously, revealed that interest in working with them dropped off a cliff. He continued, "No one wants to be associated with a brand that is unraveling so publicly. This isn't just bad PR. It's a fundamental breach of trust with the audience." Spotify, already having parted ways with the couple earlier amid accusations of underperformance and low engagement, released a carefully worded statement reaffirming its commitment to credible and compelling storytelling. While they didn't mention Meghan or Harry directly, the message was clear. The company wanted nothing to do with individuals now viewed as having misled both the public and corporate partners. In Hollywood circles, the couple began experiencing a chilling isolation. Invitations to elite events dried up. Former celebrity allies, once eager to be photographed with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, started to distance themselves. One insider described the atmosphere as quiet abandonment. Another noted, "They've become a liability, not an asset." The couple's much-hyped partnership with Netflix also came under renewed scrutiny. Though the streaming giant had released their docuseries to record numbers initially, internal sources acknowledged growing discomfort with the backlash. While Netflix had stood by the couple in the early stages, even defending their right to tell their side of the story, executives now worried they had invested in a narrative that was collapsing under its own contradictions. And then came the avalanche of commentary from media figures who had once been outspoken supporters. Oprah Winfrey, whose landmark interview with Meghan and Harry had defined the public discourse around their departure from royal life, found herself in an awkward position. Her team, reportedly blindsided by the new developments, issued no official comment. However, sources close to the production hinted that Oprah was disappointed to learn that some of the most explosive claims, such as the infamous conversation about Archie's skin color and the allegation that Kate had made Meghan cry, were now under question. Behind the scenes, Oprah's media empire began quietly revising plans for any future collaborations with the Sussexes. Elsewhere in daytime television, the shift was even more dramatic. On The View, a once enthusiastic panel split down the middle. Some hosts expressed shock and betrayal, while others tried to rationalize Meghan and Harry's actions as the result of intense pressure and trauma. But the tone had changed. There was no longer blanket sympathy, only skepticism and a sense of having been used. Political figures were not far behind. In Washington, where Meghan had been eyeing an eventual political future, perhaps even flirting with the idea of a Senate run or deeper involvement in Democratic circles, the doors began to close. High-profile Democratic strategists quietly advised clients to avoid public association with the couple. One prominent advisor was blunt: "They're not safe anymore. There's too much risk in aligning yourself with people who might bring chaos to your campaign or public image." Meghan's brand was built on truth-telling and empowerment. But if that truth is found to be manufactured, then the whole foundation crumbles. Even philanthropic organizations took notice. Foundations and nonprofits, particularly those focused on racial equity and mental health issues Meghan and Harry had claimed as their advocacy cornerstones, began backing away. Some cited the need for credibility and the importance of not undermining legitimate causes with individuals whose personal motives were under question. Social media, long a battleground between Sussex defenders and critics, entered a new phase of discourse. Hashtags that once defended the couple now trended in the opposite direction. Hashtag Meghan exposed and hashtag Sussex scandal became digital rallying points for critics. Influencers and cultural commentators who once praised the couple's bravery began calling for accountability. Among the most significant impacts was on the younger generation, a demographic that had once overwhelmingly supported Meghan and Harry. Youth-driven platforms like TikTok and Instagram, which had previously served as hotbeds of Sussex adoration, saw a surge in critical content. Viral videos dissected discrepancies in Meghan's past statements, juxtaposed them with newly released evidence, and raised questions about authenticity. The narrative had flipped. One particularly influential TikTok creator, who had once dedicated an entire series to defending Meghan, posted a tearful video saying, "I feel betrayed. I believed in what she represented, but now I'm not sure it was ever real." We all need to be careful who we idolize. All the while, Harry and Meghan remained conspicuously silent. Their Montecito mansion, once the stage for curated media appearances and carefully staged podcast interviews, became a fortress. Paparazzi noted increased security. Rumors swirled that the couple were undergoing intense crisis management sessions with their PR team. Some speculated they were preparing a statement. Others suggested they were trying to gauge how far the damage might go. But silence only fueled speculation. Journalists who had long covered the couple now questioned their past interactions. One Los Angeles-based reporter revealed, "There was always a sense that certain topics were off-limits. You couldn't push too hard, or you'd lose access. But now we're realizing that those limits weren't about protecting trauma, they were about protecting a narrative." Podcasters, radio hosts, and YouTube commentators dissected every detail of the newly released materials. Documentarians announced updated versions of existing projects to include the fallout. Meghan's past media appearances were reanalyzed for inconsistencies. Harry's public speeches, particularly those focusing on mental health and emotional vulnerability. The Washington Post published a long-form analysis titled, "From Victim to Architect: Rethinking Meghan Markle's Royal Narrative." The piece methodically dissected the contradiction between Meghan's public statements and her private messages. CNN brought in behavioral psychologists who examined the tone of the texts, calling them emotionally manipulative and indicative of a high-functioning strategist. Even in Hollywood, where celebrity politics and loyalty often intersect, the reaction was far from supportive. High-level producers who had previously expressed interest in working with the Sussexes began to pull back. Netflix, which had once celebrated the couple with a multi-million-dollar content deal, paused development on their upcoming animated series and halted the press campaign for the follow-up documentary. One entertainment executive, speaking under condition of anonymity, told Variety, "It's not about the scandal. It's about the brand confusion. We back them as victims turned storytellers. But now there's a perception of manipulation, and that's a commercial liability." Meanwhile, Spotify, already under pressure from its poorly performing Sussex-hosted podcast, removed promotional banners of their content from the platform. Social media sentiment was turning faster than executives could react. Hashtags like #MeghanExposed, #SussexScam, and #RoyalSabotage began trending across X, TikTok, and Instagram. Memes flooded in. Public sentiment, particularly among older Americans and conservative voices, was merciless. But not all critiques came from the right. On The View, co-host Sunny Hostin, a longtime Meghan supporter, surprised viewers when she admitted these messages raise serious questions. If she was orchestrating a media strategy while presenting herself as entirely a victim, that's something we deserve answers about. I still believe she experienced racism and mental health trauma, but both things can be true. This part can't be ignored. In the United Kingdom, the shift was even more profound. For years, British media had been vilified for its coverage of Meghan Markle. Many commentators, particularly outside the UK, accused tabloids of racism, classism, and xenophobia. But now, in the wake of the messages, many of those same critics were revisiting their judgments. The tone of the conversation changed almost overnight. The Times published an op-ed entitled "The Queen's Instincts Were Right," reflecting on how Queen Elizabeth II had reportedly advised caution when Meghan first joined the family. According to Palace insiders, the Queen had been cordial but privately skeptical about Meghan's long-term fit within the royal household. That skepticism, once portrayed as unfounded elitism, was now being reframed as royal foresight. Even the BBC, which had long taken a more reserved and neutral tone, aired a special segment titled "The Fall of the House of Sussex," chronicling the timeline of events that led from Meghan's wedding to the courtroom revelations. The narrative was no longer colored by sympathy, it was grounded in disappointment. Meanwhile, public trust in Prince Harry plummeted. Polling conducted by YouGov UK showed a significant drop in his approval rating. Once a beloved spare to the heir, Harry was now being seen as complicit. The question became whether he was a passive participant or an active architect. But the more disturbing possibility lingered in the subtext of every article, every panel debate. Had Harry been a pawn? A leaked internal memo from the Prime Minister's office, not intended for public release, surfaced through an investigative report. In it, a senior government advisor commented, "We are entering uncharted territory." If the royal family is perceived as fractured from within and vulnerable to manipulation, it weakens our soft power abroad. It was a striking acknowledgement, not of the scandal's emotional impact, but its geopolitical implications. In Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, three of the largest Commonwealth nations, parliamentary debates were sparked over whether the monarchy remained relevant. Pro-monarchy MPs found themselves on the defensive as Republicans argued, with renewed vigor, that the royal institution was unsustainable. The Sussex scandal became a symbolic rallying point for those seeking full independence from the crown. But perhaps nowhere outside the UK did the fallout hit harder than in Africa. Meghan and Harry had long spoken of their emotional connection to the continent, even titling one of their early philanthropic efforts after the Swahili word Archie, meaning source of action. But for many African activists and historians, the juxtaposition of their royal privilege and these latest revelations rang hollow. Kenyan writer and social critic Akinyi Odhiambo published a viral piece in The Guardian Nigeria titled, "When Victims Wear Crowns, the Sussex Myth and Africa's Silence." In it, she wrote, "We were asked to empathize with a duchess whose greatest burden was media scrutiny, even as our own journalists disappeared in the night. We were asked to revere a prince who left a palace and called it exile. But now the veil is lifting. Perhaps what they fled was accountability, not oppression." In South Africa, where Meghan had controversially compared royal life to being imprisoned, like Nelson Mandela, the reaction was especially brutal. Prominent human rights activists condemned the Sussexes' appropriation of struggle narratives, particularly in light of the leaked texts suggesting manipulation behind the scenes. The backlash was not limited to commentary. Meghan's philanthropic foundation, Archewell, experienced a significant drop in international donations. Corporate sponsors paused their involvement. The global image that had once been synonymous with modern activism and royal reformation was now a case study in brand disintegration. And through it all, one question remained unanswered. How much had Harry known? And when? Journalists began digging deeper, not just into Meghan's messages, but into emails, scheduling documents, and staffing changes that corresponded with critical dates in their royal departure. One particularly damning timeline showed a sudden staff reshuffling at Frogmore Cottage just days after Meghan's messages discussed resetting the PR lens.